One of the things that I've stressed in our coverage of the United States thus far is the influence that ideas have on circumstances. One of the things you'll note throughout this course is I'll make the argument that ideas have consequences, that the way that we think about justice or injustice, right and wrong, will lead men to do certain things. But I don't want to give you the false impression that it's just ideas that have consequences. And I want you to use the following paradigm when you're reading through this chapter that deals with the transformation of the United States after the Civil War. Certainly, ideas matter. There is an ideational component to everything that human beings do. We are communicative creatures who can communicate ideas, notions of right and wrong, justice, injustice, etc. But we are also material beings. And we are drawn to the material world, and especially in the modern age, we are drawn to its material transformation. And one of the amazing things about the United States being placed on the North American continent is it's a continent that is filled with material opportunity. All you would have to do is get in a car and drive from California all the way to the East Coast or the reverse to see just how extensive the land is, to see the waterways that go through it, to see the fields that are filled with corn and various things that are harvested every year. We are known, right, as the breadbasket of the world. This becomes central to American history after the Civil War. A bloody and horrible war in which brother kills brother, section fights section. And the question becomes, what do we do thereafter? And the answer, in part, is we get back to work. We get back toward the material transformation of the North American continent. We go back to farming. But in addition to farming and working the land, we invent new patents. We develop new ways to transport ourselves from one place to another. The railroad system spreads throughout the country. Industrialization spreads throughout the country. We move into cities. We begin to produce things on a mass scale. We take what is there in the land and we turn it into houses and we turn it into villages. And America, between the years 1865 and 1900, goes through a great amount of material growth, so much so that at the beginning of the 20th century, we are, if not the greatest world material power, close to it. I just think about that. That'd be remarkable. Think if you were 20 and fighting in a civil war, and by the time you had gotten to your 50s, that civil war was not lost in your memory, but had been replaced by the vivid image of a country that was strong materially. So that's part of what McClay is touching upon in this chapter in the transformation of America. But something else happens that I think is also interesting that takes up this question of whether or not Lincoln's plan for a new birth of freedom would be the plan forward ideationally. So note what I'm saying here. Materially, great growth, we get to work, we start doing again. But what are the ideas that shape our existence after the Civil War? Well, I'm going to argue that they're not Lincolnian ideas. That even though we enshrine Lincoln in our memory and we enshrine the Gettysburg Address in our memory and all the rest, what he was after, which was a return to the founding principle of human equality and the expression of that principle in constitutional republicanism, that is left to the side or pushed to the side because of new ideas that come forward. And we're going to study two of those ideas in the next two modules after this one. The first is an idea called romanticism, a romantic view. Now, that romantic view had always been in the world and had been in the world prior to the American Civil War experience, but it gains a fuller expression after the Civil War. And it gains that fuller expression in a second intellectual tradition called pragmatism. So what I'm going to argue is that the first part of our ideational course is moving in the direction of romanticism unto pragmatism. And this is going to transform the way that we think. Now, why romanticism and why pragmatism? And the answer to this question, I think, is driven from another author, a man named Louis Menand, an MIT historian, who writes a book called The Metaphysical Club. And he really takes up a discussion of all of the intellectual movements that are circulating in the United States after the Civil War. And he comes up with the following idea. The United States, as a constitutional republic, doesn't change institutionally after the Civil War. We still have a president, we still have a Congress, we still have a Supreme Court. But the way that we understand ideas changes after the Civil War in this very important way. The Civil War drives many an American thinker to question the older American propositions. It's a little bit like this. If our older propositions of right and justice and good and all the rest, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, if they were so good, why did we fight a civil war with one another? If we were so certain that they were good, why did that certitude lead to a violent, epic war between one part of the country and another? So the idea that comes forward out of that Civil War is that anything that is certitude, anything that amounts to certitude will lead to violence. And we need to get off of that claim to moral certitude. We need to embrace a different way of looking at ourselves, looking at how we look at the world and how we function in that world. And that way will be provided, as I've mentioned, in the traditions of Romanticism and pragmatism.